All right, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I'm very excited to be speaking with two artists that are part of the Appearances group exhibition at the Delaware Contemporary. Appearances is a group show organized by Lauren Peters. We have 16 artists participating. Each of the artists were given an original painting and a source photo from Lauren. And then they had a couple constraints, but everybody created their own interpretation of one of her early self-portraits. And now all of those pieces are on view at the Delaware Contemporary. We have lots of different mediums and artists represented. And tonight I'm excited to be joined by Max Levenson and Diva Baby. We're going to hear a little bit about your work. Diva Baby, we'll start with you. What was it like collaborating with Lauren for this exhibition?
First and foremost, I would say that it was an honor. I've known Lauren for a very long time in other contexts. I'm a Wilmington native. She's been out and about in Wilmington for a while. So, and then getting to know her when she, her painting started to really like enter my consciousness. I've always admired them, and it was really a no-brainer when she reached out to me to collaborate on this. As a drag queen, I've never been asked to respond to a painting before. So it was an interesting challenge to figure out how I would respond to a work like that in my medium, which is, I guess you could say, performance.
And there are lots of different interpretations and responses in the exhibition. And I was talking to Lauren this morning, and I just learned that she gave the artist her an image of her painting, but also the source photo that she used. So for a while, I thought artists were just working from her painting, and I thought it was becoming a little bit like telephone or a Xerox of a Xerox type of thing.
Mhm.
Did you find yourself working more from either reference piece, or were there elements in either of them that you really responded to and inspired you for your performance piece?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Thank you. So my initial idea, like my first thought was to really work with the painting. I got, an orange backdrop. I tried to find the exact wig, and then I found myself a little more drawn to the photo because there was so much humanity in it, and the way that I was forced to work in quarantine has very much felt like a person in a wig staring at a camera. So I very much connected with that Lauren of long ago. And so I feel like I would have worked more with the photo, actually, the source material, than the actual painting itself.
That's really interesting. And we were talking this morning, Lauren and I were chatting, and I was asking her about the role of the props and the accessories. And, when she puts the wig back on, does it take her back to that time and place? And she had a really interesting response, which was that no, it's a different, the way she accessorizes and puts things together, it's a little bit of a different character every time. Um, and I was really interested in how the accessories or the very intentional choices that people put into the aspects of their appearance tell us a story about who they are. And you know everything is kind of a visual clue, whether it's in art or performance or video photography. All of those different elements come together. So the choices that you made for your piece, I'm sure, were really intentional. Could you tell us a little bit about those?
Absolutely. I mean, so what you just described, that's drag, mama. That is what it is. It's the putting on of things to change the way that people perceive you. And so the choices were intentional and a little bit improvisational. I gave myself, I think, maybe 4 hours to do my makeup for that, which I usually only give myself 2, so that I could really just sit there and like stare at my face and really live in that moment of creation as sort of a connection to Lauren's moment of creation when she was painting her canvas. I wanted to like really sit with that while I painted my face. So the makeup itself was very improvisational, but the wig had been scoured for. I had, bought several that did not work. And I feel like I kind of settled on one that was reminiscent of her original, but not the exact same thing. Mostly just because I don't look good in bobs. They don't do anything for me. So yeah, the it's interesting because drag is very intentional, but my drag tends to be very improvisational. And I already said that, but it bears repeating because when I'm getting ready, I don't always know the direction I'm going to go in. Certainly tonight, this is a recreation of something that I've done before, so I had a game plan. But most of the time, when it's something new, I haven't thought about it as much as it looks like I did, which I guess is a blessing.
That's so interesting. Um, and I think really insightful because I feel like particularly your piece, it is performance. It's one of the only performance pieces. It's the only performance piece in the gallery. And people really did take Lauren's work in a bunch of different directions. And I think that everybody, you can find Lauren's original painting in each piece, but each artist really stayed true to themselves, I think, too, in the interpretation, of what they created. And I find that Lauren's work is so much about identity. And so your performative piece with, kind of, I guess, a performance of identity, if I can call it that, um, really, I think, is a unique facet of the exhibition. And it is so interesting to walk in and rediscover it over and over. The video is long, but every time I go in, whether I'm by myself, I'm walking by and it catches my eye, or I'm coming in with people, there's a new discovery. And I find that in Lauren's work, and I find that in the video piece as well.
Interesting. I mean, so as a drag queen, just to talk about my background a little bit, I started as Diva Baby in the clubs in Philadelphia, performing maybe 2, 3, maybe 5 minute numbers for tips. And when the pandemic happened, I really had to sit down and think, how does this move forward? And in my previous life, I had explored video art a little bit. And so I just kind of took that and ran with it, as most drag queens in America did. Drag is pretty much 100% online right now because of the, pandemic. So when Lauren reached out to me, I was like, oh my gosh, this is my perfect opportunity to do a performance that is longer than 5 minutes. But the problem is there's not many songs that I respond to that are 45 minutes long. So I decided to leave, just one little uh what's the word, remnant of what I used to do in the clubs at the end of the video. But I wanted to focus more on the act of getting ready as part of the piece, which is where the lipstick kind of came in. And to think about objects, like that lipstick was a very intentional object. The choosing of that specific brand and that specific shade was, I think, probably the only thing that I planned. So that was, yeah, I forget where I was going with that.
No, I love that because the piece too, I mean, it's 45 minutes long, and there's always a discovery. And I feel like it's similar to Lauren's work in that it is so much about unpacking appearance and identity too. And the more you sit with it, the more layers you start to peel back, or more discoveries that you make. And it's always interesting for me to hear Lauren talk about her work because she says she doesn't like to be in front of the camera. Um, and I could imagine, even myself, I would be uncomfortable staring at myself in the camera. And the use of the lipstick as an object also becomes almost ritualistic in a way too. It's very meditative and repetitive what you're doing with it, and then you kind of think that's it, and then there's this surprise. You know what I
Yeah.
like? The end feels very celebratory, but also like, oh, I stayed and I discovered this other thing at the end.
It's interesting that you would bring up ritual because there is a drag queen, a trans woman drag performer named Charlene Incarnate, who she's in this documentary called Wig, which if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. And she talks about drag as worshiping at the altar of femininity, and um, the act of getting drag as a ritual. And I very much identify with that in terms of where I'm coming from. with the drag. And yeah, it's the song was really very much my goal from that is for multiple people to have seen the exhibition and been like, did you see when Diva Baby did that thing? And for their friend to be like, no, I didn't. She was just putting on lipstick. I wanted it to be kind of mystery that you kind of have to be there for. Else you have to know that it's coming, otherwise you would miss it.
Well, and I remember standing around watching it as we were installing the exhibition. You know, we were all excited. We're like, oh my gosh, Diva Baby's work is here. Let's check it out. And we stood watching for a while, and then people kind of floated away, but we were all in the exhibition space, so we would come back to it. And then everybody was like, oh my God, look what's happening now. And it felt like we earned it a little bit too by
You
uh,
did.
like really waiting for it and then kind of savoring it too, because we all just were staring at each other like, this is incredible. So it's definitely worth staying till the end. It's like when you get a surprise at the end of the movie credits, only even better, I think.
Thank you. That's the exact response I wanted. So that really warms my heart. You don't know how much that means to hear that.
Oh, yay. I'm so jazzed too that we have Max Levenson here, because Max, I think your work is so interesting in that it is on the wall, uh, but and I guess I should say almost every piece is on the wall, but that you really took the elements of the work and I think went in another direction. Can you tell us a little bit about your piece in the show?
Sure. So I decided to use the wigs themselves as the material that I was working with. So I work with non-traditional materials and create installations or paintings or whatever it is that's happening at the time. Lauren and I are friends, on top of colleague artist kind of things. But I wanted to honor her as a person, as well as an artist, and as well as looking at the painting. So I felt that it was really important to use the materials that not only she wears in the work, but also works on. So I included canvas and thread and stretcher bars as part of the work to really give a different kind of layer and a different kind of feel to the wigs. Although the wigs are fun, I don't know that that's who Lauren is as a person. If we're talking about objects, I think that when you look at a person and they are dressed in that way, you are kind of creating in your imagination who you would like them to be or who they are presenting. And I'd like to see more than that when I'm looking at her and looking at her paintings. So I wanted to have a see-through kind of moment as well with the materials.
It's very interesting, and I think that, you know, even in the sequencing and pacing of the exhibition, the placement of your piece, it works really well. I think the whole exhibition is just expertly curated, but finding the texture in the various works, and for me, I loved hearing you talk about the symbolism of each of those pieces that you put together. And I hadn't even really considered the stretcher bars themselves as conceptually part of the piece, which I think is, you know, that's an oversight on my part. You know, there's so much a support usually for what the artist has going on. It's interesting to think of them in another context as part of the art or the artist's work themselves.
Well, Lauren, as a person, her family owned a cleaners for many years. So she's very in touch with textiles. And Lauren, as a person, when you're having a sangria with her on the porch during COVID, is not the wig wearing fancy. She is very genuine and very heartfelt. And I felt that the wood texture and the raw canvas was as much her as what she paints upon. So I really wanted that to be included, as well as the fact that I sewed the wig hair or tracks into designs in a painterly kind of style, because of the sewing, because she's involved in tailoring and sewing and cloth and those kinds of things. I wanted them to be part of the work. So yeah, that was intentional.
I love hearing each of you talk about your relationships with Lauren too, and just the friendships that you have, and how these choices of materials can have lots of different meanings, and also be a tribute to your friendship or your relationship with Lauren as a person and as an artist. Max, is the work that we see in the exhibition typical of other pieces that you've created, or was this a new way of working for you, responding to Lauren's painting and using these materials?
Interesting question. So I've painted in life. I was a mural painter, so that was more on walls than it was on canvas, but I have painted on canvases. And then I moved into more non-traditional work. I have worked with stretcher bars in different capacities before. I've worked with sewing of thread before, and some synthetic threads as well, but never with a wig. So the wig was new and definitely Lauren forward, in a tribute to what she does in her paintings. But I often am using different materials in different ways, and I feel like my work is recognizable through the fact that it is always a little bit different than the last thing. So I think more in the fact that I'm using the non-typical material is where it comes into being more something that I would do. I'm more often working installation wise or sculpturally lately, but I like the fact that I got to go back to flat work and a painting sort of style this time. It gives me some new ideas for some other new things as well.
And I like that you keep referencing the painting, because I do think that when you see the pieces put together and the way that you have sewn and composed them, there is a very painterly quality to the way that the piece is composed, the way that it's organized. It has, a painter's kind of touch to it in the way that it's all really carefully selected and put together.
I
Um,
thought that was honestly the hardest part for me. I knew what materials I wanted to use, but to figure out how to create it like a painting, in a way that the materials wanted to work and the way that I wanted them to look at the same time. That hair, I don't know if you've ever worked with it, but it tends to knot really quickly if you're playing with it the wrong way. Diva Baby's like, yes. Yeah. So like it's kind of really difficult. And I'm still finding hairs all over my place, but it's kind of cool. Doesn't matter.
um, hair, or in our house it's glitter. Like once it gets not Diva Baby's throwing her hands up. Yeah. Um, you'll never get rid of it.
Yeah.
Um, so Diva Baby, I know you said that you kind of went through a couple different ideas for what the wig was intentional, but there were these other concepts that you were playing with. Max, were there when you first saw the source material, it sounds like you immediately knew what you wanted to do, or were there, aside from the limitations of the material, were there other challenges that you had to work through?
My first instinct was actually to go sunglasses, but I didn't. And then other things kind of started happening with regulations of what everybody else's was going to look like, and I didn't want to be so outside of the box that it didn't fit in with the group. I thought it was important to honor her regulations since we had a little, not very strict, but just kind of some general guidelines. I really wanted to make sure that she was pleased since I was invited as a guest. I wanted to do my best job and also make sure that she was pleased with my work.
It's so interesting for me to talk to her too about the experience as both artist and curator of pulling the show together, and just her delight and surprise, and how happy she was as she saw all these different pieces coming together, because I do think there's such a range in the exhibition, but it really does come together cohesively. And look fantastic. And she's got the wig and the sweater in the gallery now as a touchstone or a reference piece, um, for the visitors to come in and understand the work. Max, as an artist yourself, is there a particular kind of touchstone or object or an inspiration that you draw from in your work,
It's
similar to kind of what we did with Lauren's source materials, or not really?
It's funny that you're using the word object. My thesis was about being objectified as a human, as a person, and whether people look at me or look at the things that I do to myself to become me. So whether they're seeing the real me or they're seeing the outside. Lauren does something very similar in a very different way. So she's doing it by putting on outfits and painting, and I'm doing that by using materials that are kind of reflective and distracting a lot of the time. So as an object, I feel like that as a human, I'm an object in a way. And I think it's interesting that object is the theme. So yes, I'm I'm pretty familiar with that concept.
Well, and I've been having talks with a couple different people about the seasonal theme, and as a museum education person, I'm coming from the do museums need objects? I don't know what is the role of the object. There's a lot of really meaty, kind of sticky stuff to unpack and get in there. Diva Baby, in your work, is there a recurring source of inspiration that you draw from over and over? To create, whether it's performance in response to someone else or just any performative aspect that you're working with?
That's a great question that I should have thought about beforehand. There was warnings that we would have to answer questions like this. So give me a moment. I would think that the self as object has been was my introduction, my entryway through drag, for drag, excuse me. Thinking about like the objects that I put on my body is something that I try to be intentional about, or rather the objects that I curate to have laying around so that I can then improvise with them when I'm adorning my body. I'd say in terms of inspiration, I draw a lot from pop culture and pop culture of yesteryear a lot. My song choices tend to skew a little vintage for sure. And aesthetic wise, I just, my goal really every time is to be the most beautiful person in the room. I see that I failed tonight, but that's fine.
That I think it's I really do feel like we could talk for hours about self as object and kind of reclaiming a gaze or how we adorn ourselves with objects and the facets of identity. I think there's just so much there, and every time I look at the exhibition or I look at Lauren's work, I find another kind of, like I said before, a layer that you kind of are peeling back. And I think about the self that other people see versus the self that the story that we tell in our head of who our identity is a really interesting concept to unpack and play with. I think I'm gonna have to sit with that a little bit more over this evening. Max, I see you nodding your head. Is that a theme that comes up in your work a lot?
It does a little bit. I'm kind of moving forward from there, but in my head, I'm going back to a question that you asked a few minutes ago. And yes, I think objects are necessary. I think they're very necessary, especially in this land of the virtual. I think that having tangible things is really becoming important, not in a capitalist kind of way, but in a get yourself off the computer and make some things kinds of way, to be tactile, to be connected to something, that kind of thing.
Diva Baby, I saw you nodding your head. Do you want to jump in? Because I'm about to get philosophical.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And it's not just because of my like low-key hoarding problem. I think that objects are incredibly important for all the reasons that Max said, but also just as a grounding tool, like having something to touch or to not be allowed to touch or to, ruin and turn into something else. It's really necessary. And I was nodding my head so feverishly because since the pandemic started, all my work has consisted of video editing. And, you know, like I sent my piece in on a thumb drive through the mail, and that was the most object it got. There's nothing left of it. It exists on that little thumb drive only. And I'm thinking back to when I was in grad school and I was making, you know, sculptures to augment my drag, and making, you know, paintings in response to my own drag, and just lamenting that I don't have the space for that in my current practice, and thinking about how I can make room for it. So thank you for bringing that up.
It's my pleasure. And as a museum, self-identified museum kind of geek, I think that objects have power, and it's obviously the power that we assign to them. And the beautiful thing about that power is that people can bring their story and their definition to it. And I hope that that's what happens in museums too, is that people bring their experience to what they're seeing and what they're looking at and considering, and that's kind of how they build meaning for what they see. And I think that that can happen in museum settings with art, but it also happens in our daily lives too. Diva Baby, like you said, you're curating your space around you. You know, we make choices about the objects in our lives and we assign meaning to them, and I think that that's a really interesting concept. And sometimes that meaning changes with different contexts, whether it's presented in a museum, whether you find it outside, whether it's in your home or you see it virtually. There's a lot to get into there. So I'm super excited that we have both of your work in the exhibition right now. Diva Baby, I know you have something exciting coming up in about 20 minutes. You want to tell us what else you've got going on?
Yeah, so you can keep up with me on my website, which is www.divababy.fun. It has links to all of my socials and any events that I might be doing. And really the only regular thing I have going on is every Monday, I do a show called Whatever It Takes. It is a Degrassi rewatch party. We are on season 5. So, you know, right after they changed the theme song, which is, don't get me started. But anyway, every Monday at 8 o'clock with special guests, there's a $5 suggested donation that goes directly to our guest. It's a really fun time. If you love the Canadian TV show, if you hate it, you'll have fun. And you should also follow me on Twitch if you have a Twitch. Perhaps there may be some other long form durational performance works that may premiere on there with no warning whatsoever. Maybe, I don't know.
Very exciting. And Max, where else can we find your work, or what else do you have going on right now?
Right now I'm kind of in a little bit of a lull. I may be doing a little more transitioning as far as materials and objectives go. I've had in my imagination an installation done with medical syringes for about 2 years now. I think this might be the time to really put something together and see where I could hang that would be impactful.
Very exciting, very timely. Thank you both for joining me this evening. You can see Max Levenson and Diva Baby's work in the Appearances exhibition on view now through April 25th at the Delaware Contemporary. And we hope to see everybody at the museum soon.